Can you imagine the nerve of some people? When my cousin, General James, was out there serving overseas, risking his life for our country, our power-hungry HOA president, Karen Matthews, of all people, saw it as her golden opportunity to bulldoze his historic family home. That house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was a treasure chest of memories, a legacy passed down through generations. She thought she'd get away with it, didn't she? Oh, how wrong she was. She never dreamed James would come back early, and with a U.S. senator on speed dial, no less. Can you believe that her petty little property violation spiraled into a federal court case, dragging half the HOA board down with her and turning our sleepy little suburb into a national scandal about veteran rights? It's wild. Welcome to my channel. Folks, hit that subscribe button if you're hooked on Karen and HOA drama, because trust me, this story's just the beginning. I'll never forget that crisp morning when I caught Karen Matthews in the act, snapping pictures of James's house like she owned the place. She didn't even try to hide it. There she stood, bold as brass in her fancy designer workout clothes, think overpriced yoga pants, and a matching jacket, her perfectly manicured nails tapping away at her phone screen like she was some kind of suburban detective. Those same hands, mind you, were the ones that voted yes on her husband's shady construction company contracts. Now they were busy documenting what she had the gall to call violations at James's home. I couldn't take it anymore. "Excuse me, Karen, but what exactly are you doing?" I demanded, marching up to her with my coffee still steaming in my hand. I'd been watching her from my kitchen window for a solid 15 minutes, circling James's beautiful colonial house like a vulture eyeing its next meal. "Can you picture it?" "Oh, good morning," she chirped, flashing a fake smile so brittle it could have shattered glass right then and there. "Just documenting some serious maintenance issues. The paint is clearly 2 shades off from the approved HOA color palette. And these hedges?" She waved her hand dramatically at the perfectly trimmed bushes my cousin's daughter, Sarah, and I slaved over every weekend. "They're at least half an inch above regulation height." "Half an inch? Are you kidding me?" I took a deep breath, channeling the calm James always drilled into me. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "James is literally serving our country right now. He's a general. This house has been in our family for 4 generations. The paint was approved 3 years ago by the previous board. What's your deal?" "Rules change, dear," she shot back, not missing a beat as she typed something into her phone with those claw-like nails. "And deployment is no excuse for letting property values drop. Did you know the community center proposal could increase home values by 30%? A community center? What in the world was she talking about? That was the first I'd heard of it. And let me tell you, my stomach churned as I watched her snap more photos. Memories flashed through my mind how the last 3 homeowners who dared to cross Karen ended up with mysterious liens on their properties. Was that her game? I couldn't shake the dread creeping up my spine. That afternoon, I turned into a detective myself, digging through every HOA document I could get my hands on. And there it was, buried in last month's meeting minutes like a dirty little secret. A proposal for a shiny state-of-the-art community center, smack dab in the middle of our block, right where James's house stood tall and proud. My heart sank. The next week was a nightmare. Certified letters started piling up at James's place, each one more absurd than the last. The brass knocker that survived 2 world wars, suddenly not in compliance. The rose bushes Sarah planted with love before James deployed, branded invasive species overnight. I tried calling James, desperate to warn him, but military communications were locked down tight during his operation. All I could do was fire off frantic emails into the void, praying they'd reach him somehow. Would he even see them in time? Every day the tension grew thicker. More HOA board members cruised by in their fancy cars, scribbling notes like they were plotting a heist. I wasn't taking any chances. I slapped security cameras up around James's property after I caught Karen's husband, Tom, sneaking around at midnight with a flashlight, measuring the property line like some creepy land pirate. But the real kicker? The day I saw Karen strutting down our street, leading a pack of suited investors like she was the queen of the neighborhood. This entire area will be transformed. I overheard her boast. The outdated structures will be removed, starting with that eyesore. She pointed right at James's house, our house. My blood ran cold. Was she serious? That night, I called Sarah at college, my voice trembling. Something's wrong, Sarah. I think they're planning something huge, and your dad's deployment makes his house a sitting duck. Her reply broke my heart. But Dad's supposed to be home in 2 weeks, she said, her voice quivering. They can't just take our house, right? All our family photos are there, Mom's garden, everything. Oh, how I wanted to reassure her, to say it'll all be okay. But Karen had already dodged 3 lawsuits from other homeowners like a pro. She knew every trick in the book, and I was terrified we were next on her hit list. Then, as if on cue, a certified letter slipped through my door as I hung up with Sarah. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting tomorrow night to vote on this so-called community center proposal. Karen had done her homework, hadn't she? That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about property values or some fancy community center. This was personal, a cold, calculated vendetta she'd been cooking up for months. How could she be so heartless? I locked James's front door that night, my hands shaking as I turned the key. I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that these might be the last hours this house belonged to our family. My eyes landed on a photo hanging on the wall, James, proud and sharp in his uniform, receiving his first command. He'd always told me, battles are won with strategy, not just strength. Those words echoed in my head as I trudged home. Then, Karen's porch light flicked on like a spotlight. There she was, standing in her doorway in a silk robe, smirking at me with that glass-cutting smile. "Better take pictures," she called out, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "For the memories." Oh, she had no idea. I was already plotting my counterattack. The next morning, I jolted awake at 6:30 a.m. to the growl of heavy machines tearing down our street. Peering through my bedroom window, I saw them 3 hulking yellow bulldozers and a massive dump truck, barreling straight for James's house. My heart raced like a jackhammer as I threw on my shoes and snatched the folder of legal documents. I'd been guarding since Karen's threats began. The fog hadn't even cleared when I bolted outside, still in my pajamas, my hair a mess. And who was already there, cool as a cucumber? Karen, of course, decked out in her designer workout gear, tapping away on her iPad with that infuriating fake smile. 2 police cars sat nearby. She'd planned this down to the minute. "Stop!" I shouted, sprinting over with James's deployment papers clutched in my sweaty hands. "This house belongs to an active service member. You can't do this." My voice cracked, my hands trembling as I waved the power of attorney documents James had entrusted to me. Karen just laughed, a sharp, mocking sound, and didn't even look up from her iPad. "Oh, sweetie," she cooed. "The board had an emergency meeting last night. We voted unanimously to proceed with immediate demolition due to severe structural issues." She finally met my eyes, and hers were ice cold. "It's all perfectly legal. We even have a city inspector's report." "A report? What report?" "What inspector?" I demanded, my voice rising. "When?" "I've been here every single day." The demolition crew chief shuffled over, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. I shoved James's property tax receipts at him. "Look at this! Everything's paid up. They can't do this." But Karen swooped in, blocking him. "Actually, we haven't received any tax payments for 6 months." Such a shame. She whipped out a thick folder like it was her trump card. "We sent multiple notices. I guess they got lost in the mail to wherever your cousin is stationed." Lost in the mail? Was she for real? My hands shook so hard I could barely hold my phone as I pulled up my banking app. There they were, plain as day, 6 canceled checks to the HOA, all cleared by their bank. You cashed these checks, I yelled, thrusting the screen at her. I have proof right here. Karen waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Those were applied to other outstanding violations. See these reports? Overgrown grass, unauthorized paint color, non-compliant mailbox height. She rattled off her ridiculous list as the bulldozer's engines roared louder, drowning out my protests. Who measures a mailbox height? I paced the sidewalk, dialing James's lawyer over and over. Pick up, pick up, pick up, I muttered, but it went straight to voicemail typical. The police officers just stood there, hands in their pockets, claiming they couldn't interfere in a civil matter. I was watching the demolition crew set up their gear like vultures circling a carcass. Neighbors started trickling outside, drawn by the noise. Most hung back, but old Miss S. Chen from next door shuffled over, her phone raised high, recording it all. I remember when James's grandparents built this house, she declared loudly. Right after he came back from Korea, the whole neighborhood pitched in. Karen shot her a glare that could have melted steel. The bulldozer claw lifted, and tears stung my eyes. I couldn't hold them back anymore. That's when my phone rang, and I nearly dropped it in shock. James's smiling face lit up the screen, his uniform crisp in the photo. Hey, cousin! His voice boomed, cheerful as ever. You'll never believe this, but I caught an early flight. Just landed at the airport, thought I'd surprise everyone. I stared at the bulldozer creeping toward his front porch, the same porch where we'd sipped lemonade in the summer, where Sarah learned to read on that creaky swing, where James's wife had gazed out her window in her final days. James, I choked out, my voice breaking. You need to get here right now. Karen, they're about to... A sickening crunch cut me off as the bulldozer claw sank into the house, splintering our family's history like it was nothing. Behind me, Karen was already on her phone, cool as ever. Yes, honey, they're starting now, she chirped. Make sure your crew's ready to break ground for the community center next week. The permits? Don't worry, I've got it all handled. The bulldozer's roar swallowed everything else as I stood there, watching my cousin's life get ripped apart, praying he'd make it in time. Could he possibly stop this madness? What I didn't know then, what none of us could have guessed, was that Karen's smug little plan was about to explode in her face in ways we'd never have dreamed. I'll never forget the moment James stepped out of my car, the morning sun glinting off the stars on his general's uniform. The bulldozer operator froze, his face white as a ghost, his hand stuck mid-motion as he demolished our grandparents' bay window. That stunning stained glass our grandmother picked out in 1962 shattered across the lawn like a pile of broken dreams. How could this be happening? Can you believe the audacity of Karen Matthews? There she was, in the middle of her pompous speech about community progress, preaching to a small crowd of neighbors like she was some visionary saint, when she spotted James striding toward her. Oh, you should have seen it. Her perfectly styled hair, those overpriced salon curls she bragged about practically deflated like a sad balloon as he walked right past her without so much as a sideways glance. The only sound cutting through her stunned silence was the sharp crunch of his polished dress shoes grinding over the broken glass and splintered wood of his demolished home. I stood there, hard in my throat, watching my cousin General James, a man who'd stared down warlords and terrorists without blinking, bend down to pick up his daughter, Emma's first ballet trophy from the wreckage. That little gold plastic dancer? Snapped clean in half. He tucked it gently into his uniform pocket, his face calm as a still lake. But those eyes burned with a quiet fury I'd only seen once before, when he got the gut-wrenching call about his wife's cancer. What kind of monster could do this to him? "MAAM," he said, turning to Karen with such crisp military courtesy. It made her flinch. Like a startled cat, I believe you're standing on my property. Can you imagine the chill in his voice? He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a weathered yellow document, the land deed from 1947, signed when his grandfather came home, a hero from World War. The second, I'm curious, he continued, his tone razor sharp. When exactly did the HOA acquire the right to demolish it? Karen tried to rally, waving her stack of HOA papers like a flimsy shield. The board's decision was unanimous, General, she snapped, her voice dripping with that smug confidence. Your cousin was informed. We have all the proper documentation for, but James, he wasn't having it. He raised one hand, and I swear she stopped mid-sentence like a naughty schoolgirl caught sneaking notes in class. Who did she think she was fooling? Then he pulled out his phone, pressed a single number on speed dial, and waited. The crowd of neighbors, wide-eyed and whispering, leaned in close, hanging on every word. Bill, yes, it's James, he said, cool as ever. Remember that talk we had about local government overreach? He paused, locking eyes with Karen, who was starting to sweat under her fancy makeup. Well, you won't believe what I'm looking at right now. Yes, that property, the one my grandfather willed to me, the one protected under the Service Member Civil Relief Act. Oh, the look on her face. Karen's cheeks went from red to pale faster than you can say caught red-handed as he dropped that bombshell federal law protecting deployed service members' rights. But wait, his next words? They hit her like a freight train. Yes, Senator Williams. The first think your committee would be very interested in how the HOA handled this situation. He listened for a moment, then added, and bring the press? That's very thoughtful of you, Bill. See you in an hour. An hour? The press? Karen grabbed her designer purse like it was her last lifeline, her knuckles white as snow. The demolition crew? They were already slinking away, muttering excuses about lunch breaks and wrong addresses, cowards. And Karen's husband, Tom, that loudmouth, who'd been bragging by the mailbox about his construction company's guaranteed community center contract? Suddenly, he couldn't take his eyes off his scuffed-up shoes. James, though, didn't waste a second. He walked the perimeter of his ruined home, snapping photos with his phone like a battlefield commander surveying the damage. He stopped at what used to be Emma's bedroom. Can you picture it? The walls still stood, but the roof was gone, and her space posters fluttered in the breeze like tattered surrender flags. The sight of her NASA bedsheets tangled with broken roof tiles, it squeezed my throat so tight I could barely breathe. How could they destroy her little world like that? Sir, a shaky voice piped up from the crowd. It was Sarah Sweet, timid Sarah from 3 doors down, who'd always been too scared to speak at HOA meetings. I have videos of everything, she blurted, stepping forward with her phone trembling in her hands. They started at dawn, ignored your cousin's legal papers, and she shot a nervous glance at Karen, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. I heard Miss S. Matthews on the phone last night saying the demolition had to be done before you got back. More neighbors surged forward, their voices rising like a tide. Cell phone videos, emails, meeting minutes clutched in their hands. It was like a dam of fear had burst wide open. Everyone had a story, Karen's threats, the HOA's bullying, but until James showed up, no one had dared breathe a word. Can you feel the shift in the air? James thanked each one of them, jotting down their contact info with the same meticulous care he'd used planning military ops across the globe. I could practically see the gears turning behind those steady eyes. He wasn't just home to a trashed house. He'd walk smack into a war zone of small-town politics and corruption. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Karen's phone buzzed with a news alert, and her face? It went from pale to a sickly gray as she read it. Decorated general's home demolished while deployed. HOA under federal investigation. Oh, sweet justice. She was crumbling right before our eyes. James straightened his uniform, those general stars gleaming in the sunlight, and turned to the growing crowd, phones now up and recording his every move. My grandfather built this house with his own hands after fighting for our country, he declared, his voice steady but carrying that unshakable weight. He taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even if the battlefield's your own backyard." He flashed a smile, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind that promised a reckoning. "I do believe the real estate lawyers are about to arrive, Karen," he added, his gaze piercing her like a laser. "I hope you kept good records. Good luck with that, Karen." Through the buzzing crowd, I caught sight of her Mercedes peeling out of her driveway, tires squealing as she fled, her precious designer purse left abandoned on our demolished front steps. But James? Oh, he wasn't done, not by a long shot. He had that look in his eye, the same fierce glint I'd seen before his most legendary missions. "Now," he said quietly, pulling out another document from his briefcase, "let's talk about the interesting pattern of contracts awarded to board members' companies over the past 5 years. 5 years? What had she been hiding all this time? I never thought I'd see 6 news vans jockeying for parking spots on our quiet little street. But that's what happens when you mess with the wrong general." The morning kicked into high gear when Senator Williams marched up our driveway like a man on a mission, boots hitting the ground like he was storming a fortress. He took one look at the rubble of James's home, our family's pride, and yanked out his phone. "Get me the state attorney general," he barked, his voice booming. "Now!" Karen came stumbling out of her house in her designer bathrobe, silk, of course, because even in chaos she had to flex her face pale as chalk. That smug smirk of hers vanished. "This is a private HOA matter," she squeaked. But nobody gave her the time of day, not anymore. 2 police cars rolled up, lights flashing, and I couldn't help but grin as she stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet when the officers started snapping photos of the destruction. James pulled out the folder I'd been guarding like a sacred relic, copies of every check he'd sent to the HOA, plus certified mail receipts proving Karen had gotten them all. "Funny how all these payments went missing, huh?" he said, his voice calm but cutting like a blade. The detective, scribbling in his notebook, didn't crack a smile. Oh, this was serious now. Then came the real bombshell bam. A young intern from the senator's office, panting from running all morning, dashed up with a stack of papers clutched to her chest. "Sir, you need to see this," she shouted, breathless. "Those documents? They showed Karen's husband's construction company had snagged the community center bid 3 months ago before the HOA even voted on it." The reporters went wild. One dug up that Karen had sent violation notices to 3 other deployed service members' homes in the past year 3. Another uncovered how she'd tried to bully an elderly couple out last summer, claiming their quirky garden gnomes were tanking property values. Garden gnomes? Who does that? James stood tall in the chaos, still in his crisp uniform, helping the forensics team pick through the wreckage of his crushed home. He didn't scream or lose it like Karen, who was now shrieking at her husband on her phone from her driveway like a banshee. No, he just carefully placed each salvaged photo and memento into evidence bags, sharing their stories with the neighbors rallying around him, quiet strength in every move. But then Karen made her fatal misstep. She stormed over, waving a thick HOA rulebook like it was her last stand. Page 394 clearly states the board has emergency powers to remove hazardous structures. She bellowed, her voice shrill. The crowd fell silent, holding its breath. James turned to her, slow and deliberate. Oh, you could feel the air crackle. "Karen," he said, so quiet, yet so commanding. "My great-grandfather built this house after World War II. He laid these bricks you crushed with his own 2 hands. Tell me, what was the emergency?" She floundered, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. The cameras rolled, capturing every second. Everyone waited, hearts pounding. Then good old Bill, our mailman for 20 years, stepped up. "I have something you all need to see," he announced, pulling out his phone with a shaky hand. He'd recorded Karen and her husband the day before, strolling around James's property, measuring and marking spots. They were talking about where the gym would go, Bill said, voice firm. This was before any vote happened. Before the vote, the state attorney general himself pulled up just as Karen's husband screeched in with his Mercedes. He took one look at the mess and gunned it to flee, but a police car blocked him cold. Inside his briefcase, the smoking gun blueprints for the community center, dated 2 months before James's house was even tagged for demolition. 2 months! But Karen wasn't out of tricks yet. She yanked out a document that made James's face go white a twist none of us saw coming. What was it? In his hand was something that could flip everything, but that bombshell would have to wait. The crowd swelled, news choppers thumped overhead, and then, oh, my heart, James's teenage daughter, Sarah, stepped off the school bus. She froze at the edge of her wrecked bedroom, backpack clutched tight, and her voice broke the silence. Dad, where are all my letters from when you were deployed? The internet would never recover from that. Karen's face turned ghost white as FBI agents stormed the emergency HOA meeting. She tried to snatch her designer purse and bolt, but they'd already barricaded the exits. Her perfect makeup couldn't mask the sheer panic as they read emails from her personal laptop proof she'd hidden James's tax payments for months while her husband's company schemed for that community center. "This is ridiculous," she screeched, leaping from her chair like a cornered animal. "We followed all the rules." Oh, Karen, did you really think you'd wriggle out of this one? Can you imagine the sheer shock that hit the room like a thunderclap? Agent Thompson, cool, calm, and collected, played that damning recording from Karen's phone call with the demolition company. And oh, it was a gut punch. I don't care if the paperwork isn't final yet. Her voice snarled through the speaker. "Tear it down before he gets back. We'll sort out the details later." The whole room gasped, every jaw dropped, every eye widened. Mrs. Johnson, our sweet neighbor who'd lived next door for 20 years, broke down right there, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. "You told us he'd abandoned the property," she cried, her voice trembling with betrayal as she pointed a shaky finger at Karen. "You swore his taxes hadn't been paid in years. How could Karen lie so brazenly to her face? James, though? He stood quietly in the corner, still in his crisp uniform, those general stars catching the light clutching. His daughter's cracked ballet trophy like it was the last piece of his heart. Can you picture it? That little gold dancer snapped in two, a symbol of everything Karen had shattered. He hadn't said a word since the agents burst in, and he didn't need to. Oh no, the evidence roared louder than any shout. The FBI had unearthed it all. Fake violation notices scribbled in a rush, backdated board meetings that never even happened. And get this, checks from James himself that Karen had stashed away in her home office like some greedy squirrel. The local news crews outside, they were having an absolute field day. HOA president faces federal charges in veteran property scheme blazed across every TV screen in town, ticker tape style. And Senator Williams made damn sure this story wouldn't just fade into the shadows. Was justice finally coming for her? But hold on, the biggest shock hit like a lightning bolt when they nabbed Karen's husband, Tom, right at his fancy downtown office. Turns out, that so-called community center wasn't just a gym and a pool. It was a cover for luxury condos that would have lined their pockets with millions. Can you believe it? They'd been scheming for years, preying on the homes of deployed service members who couldn't fight back heroes like James. The next few weeks were a whirlwind, lawyers swarming, reporters buzzing, building inspectors poking through the rubble. 7 HOA board members faced criminal charges, 7. Karen and Tom, they were staring down serious prison time for fraud and violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Oh, they'd messed with the wrong family, hadn't they? But you know what? The real victory wasn't watching Karen get marched off in handcuffs, though. Let me tell you, that sight was sweet. Or seeing her overpriced house slapped with a for sale sign when their fancy lawyers drained their bank account. No, it was watching our community rally like a family reborn. Veterans from 3 states rolled up with tool belts and lumber, ready to rebuild. Local businesses hauled in stacks of donated materials, bricks, beams, you name it. Even the mayor showed up, sleeves rolled up, to help lay the foundation for James's new home, a colonial masterpiece. Karen despised with every fiber of her being. The Historical Society swooped in, fast-tracking protection for it, and 6 other veteran-owned properties in our neighborhood. Take that, Karen. Today, I'm perched on James's new front porch. Can you smell the fresh paint? Watching his daughter, Sophie, twirl through ballet moves in the yard, her ponytail bouncing with every step. This house, it's almost a mirror of the old one, but oh, it's so much better, built with love by folks who get what service and sacrifice truly mean. There's a new wall in the kitchen where Sophie's height marks climb higher each month. Right beside a shadow box cradling bits of the old house, we salvaged shards of that stained glass, a chunk of the porch railing. Karen's precious community center never happened. Instead, that land's now a memorial park honoring local veterans, lush green grass where she dreamed of her luxury condos. I walk by sometimes and see families laughing, kids chasing each other at picnics. Doesn't that just warm your heart? Sophie's obsessed with the playground equipment, swings, and slides donated by the very construction companies that told Karen shady contracts to take a hike. James, though, he doesn't strut around bragging about how he toppled a corrupt HOA board. Nah, that's not his style. He just flashes that quiet smile when new neighbors spot the small piece of his old front door hanging beside his medals, gleaming in their display case. It's a reminder, he tells them, voice steady as ever, that home is worth fighting for. And isn't it? The FBI's still digging, uncovering similar schemes in other neighborhoods. Can you imagine how deep this goes? But here's what really gets me, what tugs at my soul. Last week, I saw Karen's son, tall, lanky, with her sharp cheekbones, helping out at the Veterans Food Bank downtown. He locked eyes with me, his gaze heavy, and said, "I'm sorry for what my parents did." Sorry? I nearly dropped my coffee. Maybe that's the sweetest victory of all, knowing justice can bloom into healing even in the ashes of greed. I never dreamed our little saga would ripple out and change so many lives. But oh, it did. After a video of Karen's arrest went viral, millions of views overnight, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Military families from across the country poured out their own HOA horror stories, each one a stab to the heart. James looked at me over his morning coffee, steam curling up from his mug, and said with that steely resolve, "We need to help them all." The news crews might have packed up their vans and left our street, but us? We were just warming up. With James's military connections, think high-ranking buddies from his deployments, and my knack for documenting Karen's dirty tricks, we birthed the Homeowners Defense Alliance. Every week, more veterans join the fight, sharing tales of unfair HOA boards that tried to bulldoze their lives while they served overseas. Karen's replacement on the board, a retired Marine named Mike with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense glare, dug into the old files and found gold. Our neighborhood wasn't her only target. Karen's husband's construction company had been sniffing around properties in 3 other military communities, pulling the same stunts, sudden nitpicky violations, lost paperwork, and lightning-fast demolition votes while owners were deployed. How many families had she hurt? I watched James turn our dining room into a war room, maps plastered across every wall, red pins marking HOA trouble spots statewide. The senator who'd backed us? He started drafting laws to shield military families from these predatory scams, and guess what they named it? The Matthews Act. Oh yes, we made sure Karen's name would echo as the solution, not just the villain, but the real jaw-dropper came one afternoon when Karen's teenage daughter showed up at our door, tears streaking her face, clutching a battered box of old photos she'd rescued from our dumpster before the demolition. "Mom never told me these were in there," she whispered, handing James a dusty album of Sophie's baby pictures, cherubic smiles. "We thought we're lost forever. Good can sprout from the unlikeliest places, can it? Just last week, we toasted the first win of our Homeowners Defense Alliance. A young Army nurse in Texas called us, voice shaking, after her HOA tried to slap her with a $100 a day fine for a flagpole her late father had planted before she deployed. James worked the phones, I fired off letters, and poof, that HOA board folded like a cheap lawn chair. The flag still flies proud, and now it's a beacon for others to follow. Remember Karen's Dream Community Center? That land's empty now, but not for long. James donated it for affordable housing for veterans easing back into civilian life. The first families move in next month. And who's pitching in to help them settle? Karen's daughter, with a shy smile, saying she wants to make things right. People keep asking if I'm still mad about what happened, am I? Honestly, I'm grateful. Without Karen's greed, we might have never uncovered how many military families were crying for help. We might have never forged this incredible network of supporters watching out for each other while our heroes serve overseas. And Sophie? She might have never learned the biggest lesson of all. Sometimes losing your home sparks something even stronger. Speaking of which, James just strode in, arms loaded with case files, that fire in his eyes blazing bright. There's a retired Navy SEAL in Florida whose HOA is trying to ban his service dog, his lifeline. And, well, let's just say Karen taught us how to handle bullies who pick the wrong veterans to mess with. Want to bet how this one turns out?